Hi, I'm Chuck Roven. I'm one of the producers of the film, and I'm sitting with Nick Kazan, who wrote the script and is one of the executive producers.
Hi, I'm Nick.
And also I'm here with Greg Hoblit, who directed the picture.
Hello.
I guess one of the first things would be good to talk about, Nick, would be the whole process, because you were the first person to be involved with the project. You created it. Why don't you talk about that?
I had an idea, and when we come to it, I'll show you what the genesis of that idea was. And I wrote notes for about 3 years, trying to figure out this beginning that we're seeing now and the end that this will refer back to, trying to have it all make sense. And sat in my room for months, writing the script by myself and polishing it. Eventually, put it on the market, and Chuck, fortunately, bought it.
Yeah, we got the script on a Friday. What usually happens is that the word goes out that there's a very hot screenplay. You know, Nick Kazan, previous work speaks for itself, and he, of course, was also Oscar nominated as a screenwriter, so we as a company had been trying to get into business with him. He made a consistent habit of turning us down every time we offered him something.
I turn everybody down, Chuck.
But we were fortunate enough to get the screenplay, and even though they suspended negotiations over the weekend, we wouldn't allow them to be suspended. And I think it was Saturday afternoon, wasn't it? We made you an offer you couldn't refuse.
Yes, it was.
The more they don't approve, the more they want.
And I called your house. I remember calling your house because I was thinking, oh my God, I've got to call these people. I think I must have called at a bad moment because you sounded sort of grumpy and like I shouldn't have called your house. And I thought, oh my God, how's this going to work out with this guy? It worked out great.
One of the things that Nick did everything on the picture, just in addition to, I mean, a great many things on the picture besides just writing it. And one of the things that he actually did was part of my job as a producer, and the fact that he got Greg Hoblit interested in directing it. So Greg, how about telling how that happened?
Well, Nick actually had written with his brother a really wonderful script called The Big Nowhere, based on a James Ellroy novel. It was actually written, I think, Nick, if I'm right, before LA Confidential.
Yes, it was.
And we had begun talking, and we'd had a couple of meetings in my office.
It's good to see you.
It didn't have a home. It was actually a turnaround from a studio, I think, Columbia, and looking for a home. But it just was such an interesting piece of material, and I was having a good time with Nick talking about it. One day, as he got up and when we finished for the day, he said, "Have you read Fallen?" And I said, "Well, I knew about Fallen. Other people had been involved in it, an actor and some other directors, and so I had never read it because it didn't seem close enough to me to make reading it worth my while." And he said, "Would you please, because some of the encumbrances are gone, or a lot of them are gone." And I read it that weekend, and I think that was on a Thursday or Friday, because I think it was Monday or Tuesday at least. I was on the phone, and then a couple days I sat down with Nick and Chuck, and it was kind of like getting on a train leaving the station. It was moving right away. There was very little hesitation on anybody's part. Deals were made, and we were into rewrites and into the casting process in very short order.
One of the things that immediately happened after Greg got involved was he met with Nick and I and told us how much he loved the screenplay and that he just wanted to make a couple of notes. And then he proceeded to fax Nick about 60 pages of single-spaced notes on a screenplay that he loves. Can you imagine what kind of notes he would give if he didn't like the screenplay? So I get this phone call from Nick going, "Have you seen Greg's notes?" So tell us about how you really felt on that one, Nick.
No, don't, Nick.
I was well, you know, Greg tends to understate things, and when he first read the screenplay, he called me and he said, "It's very interesting." And I didn't know Greg well enough to know that that meant he really liked it. But I found out because then I heard he was starting to negotiate. So when he said he had a few notes, that was also understatement.
So we spent a good deal of time working, the three of us, on Greg's notes.
We ended up with a pile. I think Greg has all of his faxes to me and all of my faxes back to him, and I believe it's over a foot high, right, Greg?
Well, you know what, those double notebooks, those double binders?
Yeah.
It's full. It's full, back and forth. And in fact, as I've been rearranging and cleaning up my office, I've found a lot more that actually were written at the very beginning. The whole thing about how it started and how the notes began, there was a wonderful read. It was just such a page turner. I just kept going to the end. I sat there and I said, Jesus. And I'd done it for the sheer enjoyment of it. And was sort of reveling in that and going, let's go. And then there was the day that I was going to come and meet the two of you, and I wanted to sit down and just have a fresh read. And then the full complexity of it, the density of it, and how contradictory certain things were, both purposeful and maybe inadvertent. And how difficult it was going to be to really meld the two worlds that Nick had generated in this movie and get the what do you say, the genres going together.
You mean because first it's a police procedural and then it's a supernatural thriller?
Yeah. And it really was just treading into very difficult and treacherous, tricky territory. And I realized that I was going, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I really had a moment of, oh shit. And I was very nervous going to that meeting because I was going, well, I'm here because I want to be here, but I'm also nervous about this thing. And then it felt like an artichoke, the whole script, because we kept pulling leaves off and discovering new wonderful things to talk about. But the notes really, I think, at least from where I was coming from, just came from my attempt to get a real grip on what was in Nick's head. What did he mean by this, or what do you mean by that, and what was the rule that got us from here to there? What did he think people were thinking, both in the real world and in the spirit world, at different junctures in the movie? And that dialogue went on rather intensely for the whole prep period, and frankly into making the movie, and frankly into the editorial process.
Well, I think we have to say that when Denzel jumped in, he also was a big contributor to making sure that all of us, but with Nick executing on it in terms of the screenplay, had a consistent vision of a character that was real in terms of the cop.
Yeah, and Denzel always asked the question, because he's very reality grounded. Why would I do this? What am I thinking? If I asked this question, wouldn't I expect this kind of answer? And if I didn't get this kind of answer, wouldn't I ask another question? And that kept pushing us. And out of that came more notes.
We're looking at the execution scene, which is, I think, the first time that we see what we call the demon vision. And we spent a great deal of time and tests coming up with the exact vision. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, Greg.
Well, Nick had described very clearly in the screenplay, and the screenplay required it, point of view from the demon. Just how we were going to use it, I think, was pretty nebulous to begin with, but of course as you evolve stuff and talk about it, you start to find a language.
We got some Guinness, we got some bass.
Well, I don't think that was it. I mean, he wrote the point of view, but Nick, I remember when Greg first started to talk about even testing a demon vision, a vision that would be from the demon's point of view, which would be different than, as if a human was looking. You and I talked about, we were worried about that because we thought a lot of the fear from the picture would come because you wouldn't know from what direction the demon was.
Exactly. I think it worked out great, but I was very resistant initially to what I think it turned out to be a fantastic cinematic idea.
It's interesting because I just thought that it's interesting how selective memory sets in here, because to read the script was so clear to me that that's what was needed,
Right.
or that's what you wanted. So I remember you guys were worried about the nature of what it was going to actually become and look like, and whether we're going to go over the top and it was going to be too weird and it was going to look phony and things like that. But I don't remember you being concerned about the idea at all.
It's a hypothetical.
That's interesting.
Cop who's trying to make ends meet, wants a little something on the side.
The cinematographer Tom Siegel, who's very, very bold
Fucking same.
and very much interested in all the latest in the technology and of film stock and lenses and whatever.
But you had worked with him before, hadn't you?
I worked with him on Roe vs. Wade. I hired him to do Roe vs. Wade, the movie of the week that I had done years ago, and then on a television pilot called Cop Rock. And I knew from those two things that Tom was pretty fearless and really, really adventuresome. And he keeps a book. He keeps a little book that he has frames that he pulls off of movies and television shows and photographs he's gotten out of magazines, whatever. He just keeps a book on different genres of film, different film styles. And we started just going through his books and locating things that looked interesting to me in terms of texture and density and, lights, the sourciness of light and such. And then he showed me one day some photographs he'd taken with a kind of Ektachrome stock of his wife out in the desert.
Isn't that Ektachrome stock is like stuff that still photographers use, right?
Yeah, still photographers, and it sort of got started in Europe with fashion photographers in Europe were using it. And he showed me these stills, and I said, that's really interesting. I said, can we get some of this on some 400-foot loads? Can they make it up? And he said, well, I think yes, you can do it. I'd like to think that we really were the first people to do this, but I began to see a couple rock videos with something that appeared to be in the world of this stock happening actually as we were shooting the movie.
Can we come back to this in a second? Because isn't this the point, Nick, where you wanted to say about...
Yeah, this is the scene which really illustrates the very first idea I had, the genesis of this film, which was of evil passing by touch. And I saw this and I felt it, and the metaphor that evil was contagious. That is, that the evil that's done to you is carried inside you and tends to be passed on. The husband yells at his wife, the wife slaps the child, the older child who's been slapped goes and teases the younger child then goes and pulls the cat's tail. It just tends to be passed on.
Damn it, Charles, what took
I think all of the touching in the film was really beautifully done by Greg and the actors.
And also we choreographed. We brought in a choreographer to do it, to deal with the touching, and rehearsed the actors with the choreographer. Well, I guess the first thing that happened was the choreographer...
We did it in Los Angeles. Remember, we just brought in a bunch of dancers.
Again, well, you had worked with the choreographer.
Yeah, in Cop Rock. His name was Russell Clark.
Right.
And a guy who had done, what was the wonderful movie with Jeff Bridges?
Starman.
Starman. He'd done all the movements and generated the movements and created them with Jeff Bridges and Starman. And so we brought in a bunch of dancers into a room that we had in our production facilities at the Culver Studios, and spent a good day going through a couple of the scenes that Nick had written to try and find a manner of touch and a manner of movement, and from the most subtle to the most aggressive, what would be believable and not gimmicky, because it was really pretty tricky stuff to do.
You can't be having the same thing every day.
What do you want? Peanut butter jelly now?
One of the things that I thought that was really great that Russell made sure to do, and I quite frankly don't even know if you just told Russell to do this or Russell just did it, but it seemed to be that the people that the demon, Elias is the first person, right? He's executed, but he's the first person that we see that has the demon in him at the beginning of the movie. And yet, when the transference of the demon goes from person to person, it seems like each one of them has characteristics of the same demon, which Elias created, right? The hand movement and stuff like that.
Yeah, he that little thing he does with his left hand and the finger, next to the baby finger, he did. And a certain just slipping into a kind of, I likened it to I say it's like you're in deja vu. You're just out of sync for a few moments, and you stay there as long as the demon is in you, and then as the demon leaves you, you slip back into normal time. And so Russell used that as a kind of way to get people just to change physically how they're moving and change their countenance.
This is one of the issues we talked about in the notes, that after the demon leaves you, you have no memory of it, but perhaps there's a slight feeling of disorientation.
Yeah. You have no memory whatsoever, and that was one of the things we had to really work out in terms of the narrative.
Right. You not only do you have no memory of the demon being in you or out, you have no memory of those moments, right?
Right.
Which meant at the end of the day, you could go and kill somebody while the demon was in you, and then of course, as soon as the demon left you, you would have no memory of it, but you're standing there holding the bag.
So, I wanted to go back and finish the story about the demon vision, because
well, it's coming up right now again.
Oh, right. That's right. We'll see the demon looking at Denzel here in a second. So when Greg says that Tom Siegel is very aggressive as a cameraman, one of the things that we found out after we had committed to this Ektachrome stock was that there was really no major professional lab that developed it. So it was like you went to this, here we're making a many millions of dollar film, and one of the key elements of it is this demon vision, and there was the possibility that we were going to be shooting it on this Ektachrome stock that no major lab would take the responsibility for developing, and we ended up going to really a rather small shop lab.
Couldn't sleep last night, Jones.
In fact, first time we did it, it looked like the stuff was misdeveloped, and as a producer, I was now all of a sudden panicking. Going, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And the way we decided to protect ourselves, which ultimately Greg, who constantly says you don't need this net, he was right about that one. The way we ended up solving, being able to continue to shoot in the Ektachrome, even though we didn't have a mainstream lab process it, was by shooting each one of the demon vision shots 3 ways. 2 ways with Ektachrome and 1 way with just regular Kodak stock. And we always had the Kodak stock sort of in our hip pocket. But Greg was absolutely correct that the demon vision was the way to go, and it ended up processing beautifully, and the rest of it speaks for itself.
What is that, his 18th victim? Could be.
It wasn't just the stock either, you remember. It was that Tom, I've always been fascinated by 6-frame and 12-frame, the process and what that does in terms of giving the film a kind of strange life. And then Tom showed me a lens called a mesmerizer, which allowed you to cock the lens either to the right or the left, just a degree or two, or quite dramatically. So the ultimate demon vision was a combination of this Ektachrome stock and this mesmerizer lens and 6 or 12 frame processing.
Now this is the critical moment that we're seeing now, where Hobbes begins to feel that maybe Reese didn't die in some form. How can something that a guy says in his cell right before he dies end up on the wall at a murder site a week later?
By the way, on the day, they had nobody else on the set to write left-handed. except me, the producer. So that was my contribution to the art department that day.
That's right, and I made sure you got $100 for it.
See, working once again in your executive producerial function. Thank
That's
you,
right.
Nick.
I took it out of my own pocket. You didn't know that, but I did.
Now, I think when you were writing the script, there was really one character that you wrote with a particular actor in mind, wasn't there?
Yeah, as I started to write Jonesy, I started to see Goodman. It doesn't happen very frequently to me at all, but I started to see John. And it's interesting with Jonesy, as the film progresses, he becomes a more and more important character. And I like to do that sometimes. You know, if Jonesy's first scene in the bar, he hardly says anything. He has maybe 6-8 lines. And, you know, you realize he's Hobbes' partner, and he says a few more lines as we go along, and takes a bigger and bigger place. And to me, this kind of character evolution mirrors what tends to happen in real life. That is, you meet someone, you have a conversation with them, you don't know that they're going to become your friend or they're going to be important in your life, and then you meet them again, you like them a little better, and you have another conversation. They tend to grow on you. So the evolution of Jonesy's character, or the way that the importance of his character emerges, to me was kind of exciting and something I like to do, and something, as I said, that tends to mirror real life. And we really fought to get John. He turned us down once, and
Well, that was, of course, the great thing. Here, Nick goes ahead and writes the script with this actor in mind, and in true Hollywood fashion, we offer him the part after Denzel has committed to the part of Hobbes. We offer the part of Jonesy to John Goodman, and he passes. And in fact, we then went and tried to and offered the part to another actor who wanted to do it, and but who had some conflicting dating problems that we spent almost 3 or 4 weeks trying to work out. And it just to show you how sometimes serendipity works. We ended up not being able to solve the scheduling problems with that actor, and so had to move away from him. And then once again, embarrassing me into how well he was doing my job, Nick comes and says, "You know what? I have a really good friend who's also really good friends with John Goodman. Why don't we try going back that way?"
And we did, and he said, "Well, if you wrote the part for me, I'll do it."
So on a plane went Greg and I to London because John was doing
The Borrowers.
Right.
He was shooting The Borrowers.
we ended up having one meeting with him in his hotel suite, I think.
Yeah.
And then we went out to dinner with him, and we talked about the part, and he was great and completely dug the character, and ended up committing to us, I think, right while we were there in London, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the other thing too, and it comes in the world of, I suppose, coincidence or serendipity, is that as it turned out, he had a commitment to do a movie right after ours. I mean, literally walk out of our set and on to the next movie. And he'd just come off The Borrowers and was going to go on to The Big Lebowski. And it slotted into this very narrow window where he could barely take a breath between one job and the next. But Chuck really managed to get the board twisted into a place where it could be made to work. Otherwise, John could have wanted to do it, desperately, and we could have wanted him to do it desperately, and it wouldn't have worked.
I mean, the thing about John is he's got enormous humor and warmth, but also he has this dark side which emerges at the end here, and which he doesn't get to play that often. Normally people tend to emphasize the first two things I mentioned, so it was attractive to him in that regard.
Go to one hole in the bag, not me.
When it's a perfect world, let me know. In the meantime, it's not me keeping his mouth shut.
I think
Good enough for you?
while we were working on the script, doing all of those myriad of notes that we kept getting from Greg, we were also starting to cast at that time, because once Greg decided that he wanted to do, that he was willing to do the film, the studio, which was Turner, the picture started as a Turner picture because this was before Turner was bought by Warner Brothers. They got very excited. Greg had just finished Primal Fear, and he had also had a great deal of success with NYPD Blue and Hill Street Blues, so we knew that if anybody could do this thing with real cops and make it be real, it was Greg. So the studio was very excited, so they immediately wanted to go forward in casting. And I forget how Denzel's name came up. Wasn't it his agent who called us and said that, Greg, you were a director that Denzel had expressed interest in working with?
Language he was speaking?
I can't really pin it down that much. I think he knew of the project. I think this is a case where his agent...
What same agency, isn't it?
Ed Lamato, yeah, which in ICM, which is my agency. Ed liked Primal Fear a lot, thought that this would be a good project for Denzel, and was certainly an advocate for the project. Denzel himself was looking to play a character that wasn't so immediately good, that might become somewhat compromised character in certain ways. I'm not sure he'd ever actually played a cop before.
Who is it?
As Detective John Hobbes, I'm looking for Miss Gretta Milano.
I was really
Yes.
clear to myself, and I'd hoped to other people about how right I thought Denzel would be for this role. He's very bright. He's very grounded. You trust him.
Sure.
And I knew that if the audience was going to trust the movie, moving from this cop world into the supernatural world, they were going to have to trust the person that took him there.
I teach theology at the university.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we all agreed on when Denzel's name came up. You knew that if Denzel believed that there was a demon that was being passed, we would believe it.
Yeah. And I think that was pretty critical to the success of the movie.
Was told to let it alone, so.
Also, Denzel is somebody who, he's a good person at heart, and you feel that. And there are a lot of actors who, and it works for them, who carry with them a sense that they're morally compromised. And what's interesting about them is that they're morally compromised. But Denzel feels like he's not morally compromised, and I think that really helps the film.
In a roundabout way, he gave me.
You think? I mean, he's a complicated guy, Nick. And
Oh, well, I know that.
He's got his dark places too, but
Yeah.
he does his homework. He commits totally to what he's doing. This is not a guy who phones anything in.
Yeah.
This is not a guy who says, "Oh, I'll do this," and I'll just sort of do a superficial bit of research and thinking about it and walk on the set and go home. I mean, he really fills up the role from the inside out.
Yeah.
And all his work speaks to that. And I think that's what gives what he does in this movie such honest weight.
Now, this is a scene that Greg and I cringe every time we see. Not that it's a terrible scene, but that I certainly feel like I could have written this scene in a cleaner way, or we ended up cutting most of the things which bothered us.
Evidence mounted up against him, fingerprints, witnesses. The press never got real proof, but my father's medal was rescinded.
I see.
It's very funny because
When he died,
my memory is that there were two scenes that carried a lot of what we call exposition
They all needed a hero, and some of these people are
to help the story move forward.
Right.
This was one of them, and then there's a scene later which is in the
Courtyard.
the courtyard, which carries a lot of exposition. And in fact, part of the reason that both of these scenes carry so much exposition is because the character of Greta, which is played by Embeth Davidtz, was actually two different women that we ended up compressing into this one character. At one time, there was
How do you know he was in?
a sort of an old,
A seer, an older woman, yeah.
30 years ago.
so an older woman
It's important to me.
who had
Don't you want to
probably a little more knowledge of the demon lore,
But
and then this character who was simply the daughter of the deceased cop, Milano's daughter.
that's it.
Yes.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, what it allowed is what was the one?
Maud.
Uda, what was her name?
Maud.
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 Right. That you could, because she was such a sort of idiosyncratic character and going to be so interesting, you could load onto her some of the expositional stuff and unweight Embeth's character of that and make her more of just a person just engaging in a relationship.
Detective, do you believe in God?
Yeah, I mean, I go to church every now and then.
But we ultimately
What I
decided
see
to
in my line of
to
work
make the
face
the
a little hard
the
to
compression, because I think we also ended up liking the idea that the cabin, rather than being owned by Maud, the cabin where the film opens and in fact where the climax of the film takes place, rather than it being a cabin that was owned by this Maud character, was a cabin that had been historically in
Gretta Milano.
Embeth Davidtz family, and that was one of the reasons why we compressed the character into one. I'm not sure or what the other reasons were, but we did it.
Well, we could speak to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
But we won't. Well, I think there was some degree of pressure from the studio
Down to the
that really
the man
thought that we were hurting
catches your eye.
in the discussion, and I think it's interesting stuff that in the discussion, because we're all making this movie in some fashion together,
Right.
us in the studio, and that there was a concern that the role of Greta and Beth's character was just going to be too diluted.
Without it. That she didn't have enough to do.
With the other character was diluting her, and it would give her character more focus. And I think that instinct was correct on one level.
So when you say pressure, it's not like the studio was saying you got to
No.
do this. They were engaging creatively with us, like we were engaging creatively with
It was
ourselves.
a very nice relationship with them. Nobody was forcing anything down our throats. They were just really, we think this, and they kind of, that argument prevailed.
But it's interesting because that scene, so by doing that, it created some places where it seemed like the exposition was a little crammed, and that scene was one, but that didn't work as well as we had hoped. But and in fact, the scene in the quad, in the courtyard, worked spectacularly.
Yes, it does.
And I think we were even more afraid about the scene in the courtyard.
Yeah, but in truth, both of them are longer than when they would have been had we gone the other direction.
Hello?
Yeah, that's for
And
sure.
things would have been a little crisper in both instances.
Let's talk about Gabriel Cassius for a second, because I wrote the character of Art. In the initial drafts, Art did not die. People tend to think, oh, you created a character who's mentally impaired slightly so that he will be an innocent victim. That actually wasn't the case. It just felt like it was a nice way to give Hobbes an odd family, so that his personal life was distinctive and idiosyncratic. And Gabriel does such a nice job in conveying that Art is limited, but he does it in such a graceful, minimal way.
Yeah, graceful and elegant, and he makes you care for him, but not feel sorry for him. It's very, very wonderful performance.
I think also it was a nice idea, Nick, because you have him as being somewhat impaired with a son who is totally normal and full of beans.
Yeah.
And the kind of interesting caring that goes on between these three men, or these three people.
This is Charles. Apparently, I must.
Without making a big deal about it.
Yeah.
The last few days.
This is the moment where it's first really clear about the rules, that Charles has no memory really of what he's been doing for the past few days.
of course, he's about to buy it here with the guy that he bumped into when they were getting off the train. And we spent a good deal of time also discussing exactly how graphic we wanted to make these moments. This is the. You also worked here with slowing.
This was 6 frame.
This is 6 frame.
Yeah. That's a process for anybody who doesn't know, where you shoot the film exposing it 6 frames rather than 24 frames, and you print it at 24 frames, which means that each frame has 4 exposures of the same image. And when the camera's on the move, it tends to give it that slightly jerky feeling, but also the film, it looks like it's streaking. It can be very effective.
And really contributes to what I feel anyway is a great looking film. When we were talking about exactly how graphic not to or not to make that scene and the other scenes in the film that had violence in them, it was interesting, what the dialogue was. I think our goal was to create a film that had a tremendous amount of tension in it, that was holding you without having to resort to, I guess what we call slasher movie visuals.
Yeah.
And pineapple. Plus, there was nothing in Muscovich's stomach, so it was the killer's eats.
Hell of a clue. You better write that one up for the journal.
I will, Lou. And I will laud you copiously.
I think what I was trying to do was, I was more interested in the steady menace that was lurking around everywhere, and not so interested in, sort of spiky, dramatic, flashy moments.
Seeing Elias here on the Reese on the on TV, we should talk a little bit about him, because he did such a fantastic job, and he was so powerful right from the first audition. And
he grabs you by the throat, and he does not let go every time he's on the screen. Yeah, it was so interesting, because I remember, even though really in terms of the amount of time that the character is working in the picture, I think that we actually shot Elias over a matter of maybe a week or 2, but of course he informs the whole picture, and he plays all the way through the picture. There were a lot of very fine, fabulous actors who were really drawn to this very small role in terms of the amount of shooting time in the movie.
Yeah, there were. Interesting, the number of people who really wanted to play this role.
It's the draw of the dark side.
Elias went to somewhere in Ohio to practice his speech in Syrian Aramaic, and that is Syrian Aramaic, and it is what it is said to be in the film, because there was one guy there who could speak it and who worked with him on his speech so that it would be fluent. So,
and then though, because the Syrian Aramaic contains in it profanities, the guy that he saw in Ohio would only teach him the words without the profanity, and we actually had to research even further to find somebody who would come up with the profanity.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? That was so.
Yes, so that Elias could insert the profanity.
Yeah, because the person was very religious, as I remember, and just simply couldn't do it.
Right, exactly. His faith would not allow him to say the profanity. It's a good thing that none of us have that problem, right, guys?
Not for a second.
Well, looking at Robert Joy's foot there in the bathtub too, I guess, Greg, you've worked with Robert before, right?
I actually hadn't. I tried to cast him several times. I met him in New York a number of years ago when I was casting some stuff for NYPD Blue, and did cast him in an episode, and then he got a movie, and it was a job of longer duration, and was going to pay him better, and it was a good option for him, so he took it. And over the years, every time somebody would come up, I'd say, let's try to get Robert Joy, and he was always busy. He works a lot in Canada. He is Canadian, and he shows up in a lot of things. He's a wonderful actor, does a lot of stage work.
Looks me right in the
And
eye. I mean, right in the
for
eye.
me, this was an easy call. I just once again said, let's try Robert Joy, and he was free.
He's one of the guys that he does such wonderful shifting when the demon's not in him and in him and then leaves him again. He really was great. And also he was one of the guys who really picked up on the stuff that he watched what Elias did.
Yeah.
Now isn't that Bill Clark, the guy who just handed the
Yeah, there in the right part of the frame, it's Bill Clark, who was our cop consultant, former NYPD detective,
Charles Old.
Yeah.
and who Greg worked with before.
Yeah, Bill really is a guy very instrumental in the genesis of NYPD Blue, and I met him in the process of making the pilot for that series, and he's quite wonderful. He's very helpful here because he just knows procedures so well. He understands stories so well.
Didn't you, Nick, have some vigorous debates with him
yeah.
about procedure?
Well, yeah, we had some fun. I got to talk about this scene too because I love this moment with Hobbes and the twirling his coin. And this is a scene, that in Greg's notes that we referred to, Greg kept saying we need this scene where to show a relationship between Jonesy and Stanton, and they should be. We need some acknowledgement about what Hobbes is going through. And I kept saying we don't need this scene, Greg. And Greg kept trying every packet of notes, every draft. It'd be we need this scene, and finally we wrote this. I wrote the scene, and I just it worked out great. I love the scene. I'm glad it's there. So persistence as usual.
But you also, when you wrote it, you really made it a terrific scene on the page because it was so spare.
See you Monday.
All right, look.
Yet all the points got across so cleanly, and that's what that's why I think it succeeds well.
Shoot it. Come on, Sam. Okay.
For anybody who needs to know, by the way, Denzel's one good basketball player.
Yeah, in the original drafts of this scene, there was another character, and I had him beating his team, beating Denzel's team at basketball, and Denzel said, "Well, wait a minute here. You're saying this white guy is going to beat me at basketball? I want to meet this guy. Who are you going to cast in this part?" He says. So we started looking at the NBA guards, but then we cut the part. So.
I'll tell you, this scene in it has a very interesting example of the power of CGI.
Want some of this? I didn't bring my shoes.
As we shot this scene, it turned out that over on the right-hand top, there were a bunch of spectators who were watching us shooting this scene, and we didn't see them when we shot. That's actually in this shot right here.
That shot right
there. They're
right up there. Yeah.
Right up on the right-hand top. There were a bunch of spectators, and of course we had a really good take. We wanted to use it, and we kept saying, "What are we going to do?" Because there are people there clearly who are watching
the movie being shot.
Watching the movie being shot, and it's a stick out. And we went to our special effects people, and they told us that they could, in fact, paint out the people and put in a very realistic background, which clearly they did. So it's truly amazing. You could never have done anything like that. I don't know, even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
Who's playing with my dick?
Yeah. Without huge expense, painted out. But it's not CGI is cheap, but it was just astonishing what they did. They were right there.
Now this next part here, we ended up going to and shooting this twice because we wanted to get the fall, and then we wanted to come back later in the film and get the winter. This is upstate New York?
This is Bear Mountain, New York, which is up around West Point. Yeah, it is upstate. It's up along the Hudson.
And
this is New Jersey.
This is New Jersey. This is, where is it in New Jersey again? It's where the New Jersey Devil lives.
Well, this is actually the first day of shooting of our film, and I want to tell you, you could never tell from what you're going to see, what you're seeing here right now, but this was one of the worst days as a producer I have ever had on the 12 films that I have produced.
And hope ever to have.
And hope ever to have. At the end of this day, somehow we ended up not only not getting the day's work done, but we ended up being a day and a half behind.
Well, you should back up a little bit. We never shot this on this first day. We never got this far. We literally, this was all planned for the first day. We just did a couple drive-bys.
That's
and
right.
That was it.
That was it.
That
because
was it for the day.
We hit a rainstorm, which we thought that we would be prepared for, but in bringing this is a very out-of-the-way location, clearly, and so we had hoped that we would have a really well-organized way to get the equipment from the road to where this cabin was, and we had planned for all the equipment to be there very, very early in the morning. In fact, when it was still dark and ready for us to unload as soon as we got there at daylight. Well, in the rain and in the fact that we were in a location that actually had only one way in and out, our big, huge semi hit a tree and blocked the road, and all the other vehicles were completely stacked behind it. And so it took almost the entire day to undo that traffic jam. So Greg, who was used to working very fast by having done a lot of television work, was a little bit frustrated on this day.
I was back in Philadelphia, and they all returned from this day. And, I came out and said, how did it go? And no one wanted to even answer the question. And everyone who worked on the movie then assembled in a large room and went through what went wrong and what we could do about it. And there was we finished the day of shooting and then had an hour and a half meeting to prevent catastrophe from recurring.
But I'll tell you, it was, you never can tell. That's one of the great things about filmmaking. You can never really tell where your problems are going to come from because, on paper, what is this scene? It's a single person coming to a cabin, walking around. There's no dialogue. How complicated can that be? How much trouble can you get into? Well, we got into an incredible amount of trouble. And it's very funny because the second most difficult time on the making of this film was when we went back to this location to shoot the finale.
But let me talk about what just happened here, because it's really a funny story. Originally, that beam did not break in this scene. We were previewing the movie, and somebody ran to the bathroom and ran back. But in running to the bathroom, they threw the door open in the preview, and the door made a loud noise, and everyone in the theater jumped, and you could feel the electricity from this adrenaline hit of this loud sound. And the Warner Brothers executive said, this is a wonderful scene looking through here, and you see Look, and then eventually Azazel on the wall, but we need a shock in this scene, and just like that door hit. And so we said, well, okay, we were going back to redo another scene that we'll come to in a little while. And we said, well, why don't we do this thing in the basement too? We'll have the beam break. And it was an idea that we had toyed with various ideas and never come up with anything. We never came up with anything. But here, because of this a complete accident, someone running to the bathroom and hurrying to leave and come back, we had this shock, and it convinced us all that it would help this scene, and we think it did.
Here again is another wonderful example of the magic of movie making, because what's happening down here in the basement was shot at two different times, almost I guess 6-7 months apart.
3 different times. Didn't we go back and do another
That's
piece?
right.
Well, we shot
3 different times.
We shot the main bones of this in Philadelphia.
Right.
But this section in here, we shot in L.A. The close stuff against the wall,
right,
and the revealing of the wall and all, we shot in L.A.
And then we went back and shot a 3rd time the breaking of the beam.
That's right.
And all of it looks like it was shot at the exact same time. It's.
At least we hope so.
Listen,
No, it
on
does.
those kind of issues, I know between the three of us, we're as critical as anybody. So
Absolutely,
it definitely
yeah.
looks that way.
Yeah.
I went to your family's place up in
This is an interesting moment here. We were shooting this at the end of the day, and when we are aimed this way, we shot going this way first, and then when we came around to this side, it had gone to night.
Your father.
The
Virtually
Denzel
gone to
side.
night, Denzel side, and Tom Siegel. We sat there and said, "Oh my God!" Because we had to get out of this location. We couldn't come back the next day. It was going to be just time was not going to permit. And he literally lit this to make it look like day. And I think that he did just a great job.
It's
He
amazing. It's
just would
seamless.
not know.
There's even
He
one
would not know that we were staring at a dead night on his side.
It's out of my hands.
It's always
My job.
part of the day's decision making
by Mr. Hobbes.
when you shoot the master, but then when you come in and you decide you're going into the close-ups or the overs, right? You have to make a decision, Greg, as a director, don't you? Whose side you're going to do first?
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you make that decision?
Well, her side was the bigger. There's a number of things that go into that.
Jonesy, back.
One, shooting towards her apartment house and towards the street behind her was the bigger shot. If you're going to use the word master, that was the direction in which there was the most production value, the most movement coming to camera from that side. And so that made the most sense.
So that's why you did that side first.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we began to see the trouble we were heading into, potentially heading into, because you remember that day we had that terrible dialogue and debate about crossing the line and
Yes.
eye looks and things like that, and it really got confusing for a few minutes. The clock was ticking, and it was getting frustrating, and Tom Siegel was, and I was saying to Tom, you got to tell me when we're dead going in this one direction, and we went in her way until there was no more blue in the sky to grab. There was no more light to grab in the sky, and then we just turned around and went for Denzel.
And the reason that Tom knew that we could do it was because Denzel, and we actually moved Denzel slightly so that his background, rather than behind him being shot against leaves or sky,
Yeah.
we moved him so that behind him was the wall of the building,
Yeah.
and that's what really allowed us to light it for day.
Yeah, you almost create a little stage by closing in as much as possible.
Now, another interesting thing that I think is worth talking about is that the reason we got into trouble that day, as you were saying, was that there was some complication about whether or not Denzel was looking in the right direction in that part of the scene where she's getting in the car.
Yes.
And also what happened was, I think, and I'm actually surprised that maybe this doesn't even happen more, but there was a little bit of complication about when we realized that Denzel might be looking the wrong way, we had to make an adjustment. Now either the actor could adjust or the camera could adjust.
Yes.
And that's always a difficult negotiation because the actor could be set in his ways, and of course the cameras are taking much more time to set.
Sometimes.
So if you're running out of light and you got to make an adjustment, what do? You got the cameraman going, well, gee, if I change, it's going to take this much time, and of course you have the actor saying, well, if I change, it's going to throw off my performance. And that really came to clashes at that particular moment, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a pretty magical moment. I mean, to characterize it not very accurately, because Denzel was, if Denzel was going to get into the right position, and mind you, there was a debate going on between a number of us, and we were seeing things very differently. I had a very clear vision of what I thought was going to work and how it was going to be cut at the end of the day, which I'm very glad turned out to be right, because had it been wrong, we would have been in quite a pickle. But what you never want to do is get an actor into a place where they're twisting themselves into a pretzel so the camera can get its job done. So the scene will realize itself sort of mechanically or technically. In the meantime, he or she is completely off their bearings for all the wrong reasons. So there comes a moment, and I remember that day going where I was simply sort of said to everybody, Denzel has to do this. This is what we have to do to make it work. All right, and go.
So what ended up happening? Who ended up bending for that to get us out of that moment?
Well, it wasn't so much a bend as one of us was right and the person at the other end of the argument was wrong.
But so did the camera never have to make the adjustment, in fact?
No.
And did Denzel, was he always looking the right way?
Yes.
So basically the whole thing was actually what's the word? The whole thing was, we were contemplating that there might be a problem, but in the end there wasn't a problem.
There really wasn't.
And the problem was that we thought there was a problem.
I just want to say one thing about this scene that we've just seen, which is that in a certain sense, although in one respect almost nothing happens in this scene is what the whole movie's about. That is the feeling that you're being chased or followed or, I don't know what the right word is. Pursued by something that you can't even see.
What were you going to say, Greg?
I was going to use the word sort of stalking. There was a menace to stalking him.
That's right.
Now, one of the things we haven't spent... let's talk about how difficult it was to shoot words on a piece of paper. How many times did we go back and reshoot those words on the piece of paper? I think 4 times, 5 times.
At least, and then we would stop. So in the middle of trying to do it, sometimes we'd stop because you just knew it wasn't working while you were doing it.
It's just amazing how some, like I said, you never know where the problems are going to come from.
Well, one of the things was that caused the trouble, Chuck, if you remember, was that I wanted to shoot the page. I wanted to shoot the pages so you saw the pages bend like they naturally do in a bound book.
Yeah.
Because pages just don't lay flat; they curve and then they go down into the binding. And you're shooting it so close, we could never find a camera or a way to keep it in focus all the way as it undulated up and down on the page. And
but what was always so surprising to me and what was getting me so frustrated is I was going, gee, I've seen this shot in so many films, but yet when you actually go back and look at those films, because we did as we were getting more and more frustrated about not being able to realize the shot that you wanted, it hardly ever is shot the way that you wanted it to shoot. You wanted to shoot it.
Right.
So there really hasn't been a large body of work to go to and say, oh, well, this is how you shoot it so it looks real and the page is bent like curved like a real book would be.
Yeah, it's true. This is next big scene. The one out in the street was something, but this is the one that was really, really hairy to try and figure out.
The other day, you were down in the basement reading an old file.
This is the scene where the audience really, you could feel it when we were previewing the film, where they really caught on completely to what was going on, and we're watching it, watching the spirit pass, understanding what was going on.
So I'm curious.
And Gandolfini is fantastic here. I mean, all the way through, he's fantastic.
But he also really picked up on the movements of the demon and on Elias's. See right there, that hand movement was a kind of paraphrase of Elias.
And you'll see in a second when the demon leaves him and goes somewhere else how he comes out of it. He did it so wonderfully.
Now let's talk about the song, Nick. When people want to know, I'm sure, whether or not we had a lot of different songs to pick from, or was this song your original vision?
Yeah, the song was there from the start. I mean, originally I had this song and I had another song for another place in the movie, a place that no longer exists, but I had the Executioner singing another song also about time. But as we made the movie, we used the song more and more. It was always here, and it was always in a few other spots, Reese and so forth. But we just felt it just every time we used it, it felt so good. We kept using it more, so that originally it was like 5 times, and it ended up 8 or 9, I think,
including the humming and the whistling. Yes.
Yeah.
Because it became a signature of the demon as well as the demon vision. So I guess we felt that it was a good way to not only create tension but have fun while doing it.
Yeah. Although it's wonderful that guy right there was able to convey I'm the demon just with that little smug look.
Yeah.
This is, one of the fantastic places where you just see it
And this
passing
is-
from one person.
And this is really, Greg, where
How clever.
your idea of the demon vision just really shines.
Who would I
Well,
say?
if you remember, it took we had the process figured out, but
Where'd you get that?
this was scheduled to be shot in one
From
day.
Milano's place?
This section in here, and I needed more. You remember, you guys just made room and gave me another day.
Like what?
Well, I think part of the reason that you needed more was because in my insecurity of not wanting to just shoot this demon vision on the Ektachrome, you needed to do everything 3 times.
Yeah,
So that soaked up a lot of time.
Yeah, it did, but I think it also spoke to the management of the movie that we could stand there at a certain point and go, we're not getting this done. I've got to figure a few things out. We're doing some experimenting here because this is the first time we're doing this, and this was the first time. We did this before we did the
interior, because the interior
we
was
did
a
this
stage.
before the interior. We did this before we did the out of the cheesesteak. Right?
That's
Nick?
right.
This is the first
Yeah,
thing
that's
we
right.
did, and this was a bit of a learning curve going on here, and we needed to push into another day and bump some stuff around in order to get it to get it all worked out, and I'm really thankful that we did.
Now, I think one of the things that's also worthy of talking about, and that scene's a really good example of it, and is how we use sound and music from, in terms of trying to heighten the tension to the sound of the demon passing, etc. I mean, in each one of those passes, you hear a sound that sort of signifies the demon passing. And wasn't that a combination of actually our sound guys? I mean, it wasn't created on the set, clearly. It was created in post-production by our sound team, but there was also some musical components in there that Tan Dunn brought, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I was hoping in this movie to have the sound effects of the movie blend in with aspects of the music, so you wouldn't really know where you were. You were in one or the other, or sound would come out of, or special effects would come out of the music, or the music would come out of special effects. So there was fairly close coordination between Bruce Fortune, who was our sound editor and the guy sound designer and did a lot of the work, and Tan Dunn. Bruce sent him a lot of the effects banks that he was building, and Tan would send Bruce a lot of the musical instruments he was playing around with and thinking about, so that both of them were aware of what the other guy was doing, and we knew by the time we got to the dub stage that we were going to try and start to mix and match and have them all feel of a piece.
And this Reese, he threatened me in Aramaic.
But at the end of the day, what Tan also did, just as Bruce does, just as a sound designer will do, they'll give you a whole package of sounds that you can access to use as accents in various places. And Tan did the same thing with his instruments. All kinds of sounds that it was almost like having it on a reel, and you just go, oh, let's take that sound and put it there, let's take this sound and put it over there. Let's mix these two sounds together with something that Bruce had, and then we'd come up with something.
I remember that Tan was so innovative in the places that he took his sounds from.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, I think I was with you in New York. This was during the post when Tan was there, not only laying down the music that he had composed, but also doing the sounds that he was bringing to the party here. And
Come on, get out
I
of
think
here. I mean, come on.
he went to a piano. What was it? He went to piano instead of playing on the keys. He opened the back and he did some weird kind of thing so he could get some kind of note off the strings.
Well, I remember one instance I was looking for the kind of a scraping thing. He gets a ruler, a ruler with a little metal edge on it, and opens up the piano and starts running it up and down the piano strings.
Edgar Reese.
A lot of that. He has a whole little suitcase of funny ceramic instruments, some of which came from his native China, and some of which he made himself, that he blows on and sort of hits and knocks together. And
That didn't work, so now he's going to try and
he would sit there and go, geez, I wonder what I can do here, what I can do here. And he'd run out in the studio and get a couple of things that made no sense and put them together and create something on the spot.
You know, watching this scene that we're looking at right now, I was reminded about another reason that Embeth is so strong in this scene, and the reason that this scene works, even though it has so much exposition in it, and the other scene that we talked about earlier, the scene in Gretta's apartment, may work less well possibly, was because of the simple fact that Embeth actually was sick and had, I think, 102 temperature when we shot the scene in the apartment. And in fact, I think that she constantly was coming to us asking us if she could reshoot that scene.
And we didn't have the time to do it. One of the reasons we cast her, I mean, she's such an accomplished actress, but she is such a clear and luminous intelligence.
Yeah.
And it really saves us in this scene. I mean, Denzel's great probing mind here, and the power of her mind. You know, it's a scene which you know, I was terrified of because of.
It's 5 pages of dialogue.
It's 5 pages of dialogue, you know, explaining what's going on in the movie, and you know, the way that Greg shot it was so good, but you know, I didn't know that going in. I mean, he told me the concept, and it sounded good and exciting. But you know, this is a scene where, you know, I worked on it and worked on it and worked on it before we went to Philadelphia to shoot it, and then we met with the actors, we read it, I completely rewrote the scene, we read it again, I tinkered with it some more, then we went out there on the day, and it really worked. And you know, thank God we had these two actors to make the scene work.
Well, it's, you know, well, we're heading into a whole thing, but there was another part of that equation too. You remember that, because it was, well, let's stop. We'll watch this.
Wait, come on, Greg.
Well, that scene was originally set in a restaurant.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And I was very afraid that it was just going to be, because of the expositional nature of it, we were gonna die in the restaurant. And what was so great about these two actors is that when you put the scene like that up on its feet, by being on its feet, it's gonna have an energy it doesn't have otherwise. And they're so facile and talented that they could do it over and over again that day, on the move, and do the whole scene in one long run.
Absolutely, it's you know, it wouldn't have worked in a restaurant. It worked out there. It was great.
I want to interrupt you guys, because we just entered a scene here that, in fact, was the other scene that we reshot.
Well, we didn't reshoot. Well, actually, we did reshoot. Yeah.
We had a scene earlier. Originally, where she was being followed by the demon in somebody's body, but he had a knife in his pocket, and in fact he was going to try to stab her in a revolving door. And in the previews, the scene worked well. It was very serviceable for what we were trying to accomplish in terms of tension and scares at that point in the film. But all three of us felt that it wasn't inspired. It wasn't taking the possibilities of what the demon could do and really, you know, stretching it and taking best advantage of what we could be taking best advantage of. So we all talked about the fact that we could do something better, and therein this scene came out.
Fast touch scene, I always called it, you know, and it's really electrifying to watch it again here.
It would be really interesting if there was ever a way to show that other scene and compare it to this. I mean, the amount of tension that we're creating here, it's incomparable. How much better this scene is than the scene that we replaced this scene with. You know, sometimes you have something that's finished, and something's gnawing at you, and you're going, you know, it can be better. And that's really what we did here. Is all three of us felt that section of the movie could be better.
And Warner Brothers deserves a lot of credit too, because they gave us more money to finish the film, to make to do that little piece in the basement and to do the scene you just saw. And as we've said, the film was working very well. Warner says, we love the film, we're satisfied with the film. And we said, but we can make the film better. And they agreed to let us do it.
When you see this film, or when we saw this film with an audience in the movie theater, that scene that we just saw was one of the scenes that really,
I never believed
it worked so well.
I thought God would make it up to me. I'd be a good girl. God would show me an angel instead.
Remember this day, this was a little short scene that took the entire, well, we actually started late in the afternoon and we went into the morning because of lighting this church. Big job.
Wipe your tears.
We lit the church, really, for that overhead that the scene opens with.
Yeah, for this shot here.
And this shot here, right.
That began on a high crane and dropped into that position.
We have to talk a little bit about Donald.
Yes, Donald.
Oh, we don't have to talk about Donald.
We have to talk about Donald because, one of the most amazing things I remember is like this was Donald's 96th film or something.
Yeah.
When you think about this guy's body of work, it's pretty extraordinary.
And he's a fantastic character.
He is a fantastic character. He's a fantastic actor.
And he never wanted to see Nick Kazan coming towards him.
Why is that?
His worst nightmare as a writer, but that's his biggest love as a writer too. But he just knows that he's going to have to pay attention. And I say, I don't know, Donald, about this. That's a good thing. Let me get Nick. And you go, oh no.
Oh, was this because he wanted to change the lines
No,
drop the lines?
No, it became kind of an endearing thing. And we had a lot of fun with it. No,
it wasn't that. I don't know what it was. He's just leery of having a writer on the set.
Well,
it must have happened before in 96 films, but
yeah. But I'll tell you guys, I think that quite often the writer is not on the set. He's quite often, in fact, the writer and the director aren't talking. But quite often the writer is off writing something else, maybe not even in the same town.
You don't really want to know.
Certainly with the advent of fax machines, even if you're requiring something that needs the writer's immediate attention, he doesn't necessarily have to be on the set. We just happen to think it was worthwhile to have you on the set, Nick, because one, I love the fact that you so often did my job, which made my life easier, and two, I guess you so often did Greg's job, being able to talk to the actors, so made Greg's life easier.
I'm just here to serve.
No, I would just say, there'd be this question, I go, I didn't write this crap.
That's right.
Go talk to the guy who did, I mean.
Maybe he can figure it out. And sometimes I could, but not always.
But it was a necessary collaboration because the material was so tricky. And I mean, seriously, he was making sure that the rules that we were putting in place and a certain clarity that was needed in order to understand the rules and motivation and the emotional life that was coming out of them, we checked ourselves a lot. Is this working? Is this making sense in between Denzel or Donald or Embeth or John and Nick and me? We did a lot of double checking.
The truth is that filmmaking is such a complicated process. There's so many things for everyone to pay attention to, but particularly the director, that it's helpful to have the writer there and to have the producer there saying, what about this, what about that, because you're bombarded with questions as a director, and it's hard to focus on all of the many things that you have to pay attention to.
What?
Yeah.
No. What?
Boy, I love these two guys together.
All right.
They're just so good.
Yeah.
What's wrong with your eye?
As Denzel drove up to the exterior of his house, I thought about, I think the town in in Pennsylvania is Maniac. Maniac. And I remember when we were scouting locations to decide where we were going to shoot the exteriors of the film, one of the things that we did on purpose was we knew we wanted snow and season, so we knew we wanted a northeastern look, northeastern city, but we also wanted to make it an ND city, and yet we wanted to make the locations fresh. And we hit New York, I think we hit Boston, Chicago.
Baltimore was considered.
Then finally we went to Philadelphia, and you went to this place in Maniac, which we're about to see a lot of the exterior of Maniac right now in this little chase sequence. And the reasons why we picked it, I think, was because it was very fresh looking.
I love this kid. This kid is a great demon.
Go back in the house!
I love when he says, hey Hobbes.
Hey Hobbes.
I love that.
You come after me, I'll come after yours. If you come after mine, I come after yours.
Yeah.
Why? You come after me, and I'll come after you and yours.
The location was just so wonderful. It had a sort of European feel, an otherworldly feel. The cobblestone streets and it's an old time out of place out of time, I should say. And it just seems so appropriate for kind of the timelessness of the idea of a demon being on the move.
So this little chase here really gives you a whole idea of what the whole neighborhood here looks like, and why we picked it, because it clearly looks, as you said, timelessness. Clearly is East Coast.
Yeah, you don't see this in.
You don't see this.
In West Orange. Orange County.
Right.
West Covina, I was going to say. I was going to speak also to the casting in the movie a little bit, outside of the name principles, and that's the job that David Rubin did, finding these kids, setting up casting offices through a colleague in Philadelphia to cast people, a lot of people locally. This fellow here,
that young kid,
the kid Tony was cast there. The woman out in front of the precinct, wearing all the fur, the little guy that she was walking with. Quite a few people came out of Philly, and they were very, very good. It's all part of the kind of job that David Rubin did in organizing for us, and coming at that girl standing there. It was pretty wonderful.
Now remember, when we shot this, what you can't tell is how cold it was outside at that time. I was way down near 0, and of course the guy that we that was just shot, he now has to play this whole scene on the rest of this scene on the ground, and he clearly is not dressed for how cold it was. So what we had to do was we would take a big flamethrower, and literally we heated the stones down there until we got not only the chill off it, but actually made it very, very hot. And then we laid him down there so that he could be comfortable enough to make it through the scene. And we'd in between takes we would have to do that because that's how cold it was.
Yes, it is.
This location was a nightmare. Remember the crane fell? We just had that crane shot from overhead, and the crane fell. We nearly had an enormous disaster.
We actually had to come back to try to get that crane shot, which is the demon leaving the dead man and going up in the air and going into the young girl here. We actually had to come back to get that shot 3 different days. We ran out of light the first day. The crane broke the second day, and the third day we finally got it. And there were days when we actually thought that the fact that we were making a film about a demon had in some way incurred the wrath of demons, should they exist, and that they were they were playing pranks on us. Another thing that I think, looking at the film, I'm reminded about all the discussions that we had with both the production.
This little moment here, I'm sorry, Chuck, this little moment here is one of Greg and my favorite moments in the film. just these two guys standing there, not saying anything,
Just
sharing the tragedy.
So what I was going to say was that a great deal of time in the pre-production of the film was spent discussing what the look of the film was going to be, both from production design and costume design, particularly in the area of what I'm going to call the color palette. And we wanted the colors to be very neutral, except for when we were in demon vision. Then we wanted the colors to pop out at you, and we accomplished this by making sure that the people that the demon looked at were dressed slightly more colorful than the rest of the people. So we did this together with Terrence March, who was the production designer, and Colleen Atwood, who was the costume designer. They were the ones who needed to execute on this color palette vision that we had of the film. And we also talked about the color changing seasonally.
Now it's letters. Fuck you.
Because the beginning of the film, so we talk about it, the execution would take place in early fall or Indian summer, right?
Yeah.
And so we wanted the colors to be those beautiful burnt colors. And then as the film continued to move on and things were getting, sort of the noose was closing around Hobbes, the film would get a colder and colder look, taking us into the dead of winter where the climax takes place. And we not only had to make sure that we bought clothes that would follow the color palette, as you can see here, but that the backgrounds that we picked, or the buildings that we picked, would also follow that neutral color palette, except for where we wanted to be making a color statement.
Yeah, and also Tom Siegel, who was changing film stocks to get the most out of the color palette as well on film. How many 11 different stocks we used in this movie altogether?
We used 11 different stocks between the Kodak, the various Kodak stocks, and the Ektachrome stocks that we used, which.
But it was to create a colder and colder look as we went deeper and deeper into the movie, so that was all coordinated.
And then, in fact, we used a printing process that is called ENR to actually make the blacks deeper and richer, and which also serves to neutralize or thin out the colors, the other colors, the reds, the yellows, the greens, except that, of course, the ENR doesn't really work the same when you're dealing with the Ektachrome. Those still are very poppy. This scene that we're about to see right now was one of my, and remains one of my favorite scenes, because I found it so fascinating. I remember when I first read the spec script, this scene just blew me away, because here we were, you know, Nick, you had taken me then as a reader in this incredible ride going from what I thought was going to be a cop thriller into this supernatural thriller. And all of a sudden, here in what one would say is a genre film, supernatural thriller, here we have these two guys who are so serious about what they're doing that they have the impetus to talk about God and why we're here. And I said, man, if we can get away with this in this movie, what a great thing that would be. I just love this scene.
And as we talked to a lot of directors about doing this film, and in one way or another, we were always trying to figure out what they thought of this film, of this scene, because this is a scene that from a narrative standpoint could be cut, but it was always one of my favorite scenes. It was one of the first scenes that I wrote. Before I wrote the script, I wrote the scene. That is, I started to hear the scene, I wrote it down, and it basically came to me, and that's the scene that you see right here. So, I mean, before I even knew who was talking, I had the scene. So it was a scene that was kind of delivered to me by my muse, and I was really pleased that Greg seemed as committed as I was to keeping the scene in the movie from the very start. And I know the actors were very concerned about this scene because it's a big character scene, it's an enormous dialogue scene, and they sort of knew that the scene had to be pretty good, or it was gone.
And I think that even after we shot it, because it's the kind of thing that you do in the post-production and editing, we messed around with its length. We even did talk about previewing the film without it, but we resisted it.
You don't get to hang around anymore.
But not only is it a fabulous scene for what it talks about and really enrich these guys' character. They talk about why we're here on Earth and God, and it's the kind of thing that I always say, people think about but very rarely actually speak about, and you very rarely see it done in a film. And I think that not only does the scene work here itself, but I think it really, really impacts us in terms of their relationship. And when at the end of the film we see that in fact the demon's in Jonesy, I think it makes a great emotional impact, because we've had obviously all of the relationship scenes between these two guys, but this one in particular.
Absolutely.
So like this could be it for me?
That's the beauty, you never know.
Hello.
One of the things I liked essentially about it was you have two guys who normally wouldn't be thinking about these things or talking about these things, who are unthought out about these things, sort of discovering a little bit through the exchange what they may start to think about these things. And it just had such a nice simplicity to it.
Yeah.
And these guys just didn't. Oh man, they took a wonderful scene and just put it on a different level.
It was an enormous relief. I remember the first time we previewed the movie, coming up to this scene, I was really nervous, and then we got into the scene, and you could just feel the audience kind of breathe a sigh of relief to have a scene with two guys just sitting around talking and dealing with sort of the underlying substantive issues of the film, and laughing appropriately where there was humor in the scene, and being with the scene. And I was just I had enormous trepidation, and I was just so thankful at the end of the scene.
But I remember the audience was noticeably in the scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was really gratifying.
Are you sure?
Now, kind of from this point on, I think is where, in terms of all of the reworking and rewriting, not so much for character, but in terms of the replotting that we did from the point in time in which we, I guess, got involved in the project, Nick, in the sense that we bought the spec script together with Turner. From here, I would say until the end of the film is really where there was quite a lot of plot changes.
Yeah, most of the work was in the last 40 minutes of the film, that's right.
What are you thinking?
Because, as you said earlier, very shortly now, Denzel's going to wake up and find that his brother is dead. And I think that his brother,
Good night.
in the first passes, the brother was alive.
That's right.
And I think it was one of the reasons that we went in this direction was because we wanted to make the demon so aggressive at getting Hobbes that he really wanted to get not just Hobbes but everybody close to him.
Morning, Sam. Good morning, Sam.
Because I think also, so yeah, and you have to, my memory fails me right now, but I think also the mark on Sam was also an addition. Is that correct?
I don't remember it. I think so, but I'm not sure. The process that you're talking about is one that happens, in my experience, on most scripts. That is one of the things we talked about earlier, the combining of characters. Usually in a first draft there are more characters, and later on you combine them, and also, you know, making things more intense in the last act, or the last 40 minutes of a film, is something which also happens quite frequently.
When we were also dealing with the script and we were trying to decide where we were going to lay out the clues that the demon was leaving for Hobbes, I believe they changed around too, didn't they?
Yes, they did. We had a lot of we finally ended up with something from Ecclesiastes, is that right? No, Revelations. But earlier I had a whole bunch of different passages from the Bible, and we just kept playing with one thing after another.
Actually, as a matter of fact, I think the whole putting in of Bible references was additions.
There was always something written, but it led a variety of different places. I can't remember the whole progression.
Like this scene here where Denzel discovers that his brother is dead is one of the most powerful moments of Denzel's performance in the picture. It's just so, so less is more.
Yeah. He doesn't have to say anything to make it, to convey. That's why I think he's such an extraordinary talent. He just do it with a gesture or with his eyes.
And in the editing process, I guess this is a good time as any to talk about the editing process. The editor of the picture was
Larry Jordan.
Larry Jordan, and I think you and he, recut this scene for a number of different reasons, a number of ways. How much time was Denzel going to spend sitting on the bed? How much play were we going to give the poison? And then one of the big moments of the scene is just about coming up here, which is when he gets up and he walks over to the door. We had it cut a number of different ways, and there's about 30 or 40 seconds of Denzel at the door. It's happening right here, right now. Initially we had cut this out, but this moment here is so strong that every time we took it out,
we missed it.
We just had to put it back in.
And Denzel's such a fantastic actor because every time that he would come to the door, he would do a different thing. Sometimes he turned the other way and adjusted something on a shelf, and each time he only did what felt real to him. He couldn't repeat anything because it wasn't spontaneous and real. And over and over again, we would have that happen on the film. He would do something wonderful, and I'd say to Greg, well, maybe you should do that again. That was so good. And Greg would say, He'll do something different this time. And it was always good.
Now, that can be great, but that can also pose a real editing nightmare when you have to come to match moves from different sizes, the long shot to the close shot.
Well, you know what I would do? When I knew I had to do that, though, Chuck, I'd tell him. I'd say, I need this to work. I need this to be the same, because I'm stuck. But on those places, like Nick's just referencing, and it was going to be just one thing, or probably would end up being one thing, he'd get bored doing the same
Just
thing
do what I
twice.
tell you, please.
Now, Larry Jordan, you had also worked with in the past, hadn't you?
Yeah, I hired Larry Jordan to cut the NYPD Blue pilot for me. And he really understood. He just understands what I shoot, how I shoot, which I think is pretty important to that relationship. That an editor understands when they start to see the dailies what's going on, because they understand the language that's being used. And so I knew that Larry was going to get this very quickly.
Now we're about to enter here a whole section of the film that really radically changed in the editing. All we really did was take out a character and with one shot, the shot of this girl coming back into the film, replaced a character who was, I think we called him the
What was he, Nick? He was
the stalker.
Yeah.
But we shot a section of the film where we had the demon having passed to a character we had never seen before, which is why we call him the stalker, who was walking relentlessly towards Denzel and Michael Pagan, who plays his nephew.
How you doing?
But when we cut the film together, we felt that concept of the stalker walking relentlessly towards them as they were running away wasn't quite working for us. And we felt we could get more mileage by having the young girl who had been at the scene of the shooting and who had gone on record as saying that Hobbes had shot first because the demon had passed into her, come back and sort of smirk at him having to run out of his house. And I think we all agree that gave us a really kind of eerie quality that we wouldn't have had if we would have left the stalker stuff in.
Craig made an interesting choice here in casting this cop as black. And I know Denzel was initially resisting. He said, the only person I punch is a black man, but it helps give the film a level of moral complexity, that it's not simply, the issues are not black and white. The issues are gray. And, I think after initial resistance, Denzel saw that was right and went with it.
When we were shooting here at the train station, we got really hung up because, in fact, in moving the train in and out, all of our electrical cables became entangled underneath the train's wheels. And the first time that we were there at that train station, the train became just this kind of electrical hotbox because of the electrical power that we had being entwined underneath the wheels, and became so dangerous that nobody could actually walk on the train. So we had to cart it to a place where they could disengage it, and just another one of those production problems that you can't tell where they're going to come from, which caused us to have to go back to that location another day.
Police think that.
Gee, it's funny. I have such a vague memory of that, Chuck. I didn't know it was that elaborate. I just knew that we got entangled up, and so it really was a big deal.
Oh, it was a very big.
I knew it's
the entire
vague,
car, and we were planning on that day shooting.
I remember.
Not only there at the station, but getting on the train and shooting the scene where Denzel speaks to the nun on the train and actually puts together the rest of the apocalypse problem. And the train was so dangerous that literally we had to make sure that the crew did not stand on it. There was a danger that if they just literally stepped onto the train, they could electrocute themselves.
Now this scene here, we lost the sound.
Oh yeah.
From the time the sound was recorded, the sound, and whoever was delivering film and sound, somehow the sound fell out. And we thought we were going to have to come back and record this scene where this kid, Michael Pagan, is so so good, and we thought, oh my God, what a disaster. We don't want to loop it. That would be even worse. We're going to have to come back and reshoot it. But the backup sound turned out to be quite good.
No, it's not really even the backup sound.
It was, yeah.
It was what you do on a set is nowadays is you have a thing called a monitor, which the director and the producer and the writer and other people view actually what the camera is seeing through a stand-up monitor. And you can also record it on tape so that you can play it back. So it gives you something visual to recall. You can actually look at what the camera has recorded, and it can, in fact, save you a lot of time because you can see whether or not you've gotten it, so to speak, and not have to do the shot again. Whereas without recording it, you would have to just guess or replay in your mind what had just occurred. So we have very low quality, low level tape. I think it was high 8 tape that these scenes are recorded on, and it's got the sound attached to it. And it was that sound that we took to a sound house and had them do whatever they could do to make it the best possible sound. And in fact, it turned out that we got it to be good enough quality that we didn't have to go back and reshoot the scene or take Michael Pagan to a looping stage and have him try to revoice it to picture.
As I remember, I think, wasn't the sound was left in a taxi cab in New York?
Well, we weren't sure. What happens every day when you're in Philadelphia is you have to take the sound and the picture to a lab, and there are really only the two main motion picture processing places. One is New York and one is Los Angeles. So if you're not working in one of those cities, what you really have to do is you have to somehow get the stuff to one of those cities, and there's usually a day delay or whatever as you process the film and then get it back to you on the location that you're at. Here we were in Philadelphia, so we didn't have to send a plane, we didn't have to have the person take a plane or anything, but they did have to get from the set to a train station, get on the train, take the train to New York, which was about an hour and a half, get off the train, get in the taxi, and go to the sound processing place and to the film processing place. And in between our set and the sound processing place, that sound fell out of our messenger's bag. And we took out ads in the newspaper. We
put out a big reward.
We put out a big reward.
That reward, by the way, is no longer valid.
we had them announce it on the radio. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who called in to say that they had found sound recordings. But of course it wasn't our sound recording. But we were fortunate that the sound worked anyway.
Yeah, that was just so dumb luck. Remember how devastated we were all feeling? And then they were able to enhance it, and they pulled it up, and it was just something kind of miraculous.
Even though we work with this stuff all the time, the changes that happen even from one film to the next in just a matter of months are just staggering. What the quality, what the progress in quality is in all of these things, from film to sound to video. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, the technology is just non-stop.
Non-stop advances.
There's a process now, Chuck, that's better than ENR, and there's a film stock that Kodak has developed that is complementary to it. Complementary
to the process,
yeah,
that is better than ENR?
Yeah.
But does it accomplish the same thing in terms of the depth?
Yeah. It's just better.
So we're about now to head off into the climax of the picture, which takes us back to that cabin. And earlier I remember talking about what a horrible time we had on our first day of shooting at this cabin. Now I'll tell you about the horrible time that we had trying to finish the film at this cabin, which was, we went out there and started to shoot a couple of days before Thanksgiving, and of course it was very important for everybody that we finished the film the day before Thanksgiving, so everybody, or at least shooting the portion that we were going to shoot in Philadelphia, we had a lot of stage work to be done in Los Angeles. We were going to take the Thanksgiving holidays off and then go back and pick up shooting the film in Los Angeles. So we had several days in which to shoot the climax of the film at these at this location in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, which was just outside of Philadelphia. And the first thing that we needed was snow. Of course, you know, we're now in November. The Farmer's Almanac told us that we could probably count on snow. But you know, one thing you can count on, if it's weather you need, it is weather you will not get. So in fact, all the snow that you're seeing right now was handmade. We made it ourselves, and we hoped that from one day to the next, at least if we had to make this snow, the weather would be cold enough that the snow would stay on the ground. I remember telling you earlier that when we shot the scene in the city in in the town of Manioc, of the school teacher being shot on the ground, it was so cold we had to heat the ground. Well, now we needed the cold, and of course we hit a hot spell. So every day we would have to spend hours and hours and hours of relaying the snow before we could start shooting. And you know, the other thing that becomes very, very complicated here is because it needs to look like it's virgin snow. In between every take, you literally have to brush the snow, reset the snow to make the snow look like, once again, it's virgin. So this really slowed us down. It made working there very, very difficult. And we fell behind, and all of the pad that we had hoped we would be able to not have to use, we started to use up very quickly. And it finally came to, we were on the last day, the day before Thanksgiving, and we had to finish the sequence. And the worst possible thing happened. It started to rain. Well, when it rains, you can't have snow. And literally, we came to our set on the last night, and we were 4 inches underwater, and the entire set was muddy, full of water. And in what was an extraordinary effort by our entire crew, we literally spent the entire night drying it out, laying rocks and asphalt to give us a base from which we could relay new snow. And we actually finished shooting the day's work in bright sunlight. So it was there was the reverse of having run out of light. We didn't want the light. It was really one amazing night.
If that last shot hadn't been aimed at the ground, we were dead meat. You know, we were up high on a crane shooting straight down. If we'd had any sky at all, we would have been totally exposed.
Haven't you done enough, huh? Made me kill an innocent man, you...
Now,
murdered my brother?
Also what's coming up here
You son of a bitch!
shortly is
How much more fun can you have, huh?
one of the great reveals here, which is Stanton coming out of the woods. When we shot this, of course, right now we're not sure who the demon is in. We think it's in
Me.
in the character of Stanton, but it turns out being in Jonesy.
I know you got one.
And then Jonesy ends up shooting Donald Sutherland, and later in the film, Denzel ends up shooting Jonesy. And what we had to do was we of course had to use various devices to execute on the hits, and we used two complete different devices for each shooting, because Donald Sutherland was uncomfortable with the normal explosive pack, wasn't he, Greg?
Yeah, he was really concerned about how close it was to his ears and to his eyes, in order to, and so we had to divide some things that.
So I think, in fact, the
well, I think the first thing is they wanted to shoot. It's almost like a pea shooter,
right,
where someone stands close and shoots a little pellet that would hit him, and like a little pack of red dye. And he was really, really not going to be comfortable with that anything being aimed at him.
right, he was worried they might miss and hit him in the eye or something.
He would flinch and.
So we rejected that. I think we tried it on a stand-in or something, and then did we ever use the explosive pack on him?
Yeah, so it was behind one of his ears. And then remember
Right, but there was no. But what he didn't want to do was he didn't want to have. He didn't mind that, but he was unhappy about using something for the entry point of the shot.
Yeah, he just didn't want anything aimed at him, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to act it.
What's wrong with that?
He knew that he would be flinching or he'd be anticipating it would show up, and he was just fearful of injury, which was understandable in terms of a person's qualms about that. Although the state of the art these days is such that what we were asking him to do was not going to put him in jeopardy.
But ultimately, I think we ended up solving the problem again through the use of CGI.
Well, what happened is that the little pack we put behind his ear away from camera, when it went off, you can see it.
Yes, no, I know.
Out.
I know that we ended up painting that out.
And
but I'm also talking about the shot of the bullet entering.
Yes, we created that.
Originally in this scene, there was only one guy going up, and Chuck kept saying, "Wouldn't it be good if there were if two guys went up there?" And I kept saying no. And Chuck is admirably persistent, and he kept at me. And it's a very good process because over time, my resolve weakens. Or another way to say it, I get used to the idea, and I find a way to do it. And I'm really happy with how this turned out here. I think it's a very interesting tension with two guys there and not knowing which one it is. John Goodman just loved this part where he gets this he gets the change.
You're fucked. One at a time.
And I think he also loves the part when he gets to finally sing his version of the Stones song.
Yeah.
Is on my side. Yes, it is. Time is on my side. You like the Stones, Hobbs?
I think another thing that really enhances the film, the tension in the film right now, is Tan's score. This was the first American film that Tan had ever scored. He coming from China, he had done, I think, a couple of Chinese films. Isn't that right, Greg?
Very, very small budget. I mean, literally $2,000 or $3,000 films that were made by Hong Kong filmmakers or filmmakers in the provinces.
And once again, fearless Greg, who loves walking around with no net, came to Nick and I and said, there's this guy, his name is Tan Dunn, I've been hearing his music, and I know it's unconventional, and I know he's never done a Hollywood film before, but I think I want to give this guy a try. And we spent a great deal of time talking about it, but ultimately Greg's persistence swung us around, and
we spent a long time trying to talk Greg out of a good idea, basically.
right, but we were fortunately unsuccessful in being able to do so. But I have to say, to Greg's credit, he spent a tremendous amount of time working with Tan, which he said he would do, and I think that it really, you know, the way the music supports the tension in the film, I think, is really, really terrific.
You got me, Hobbes. You got me good. But I gotta ask you something. You wouldn't let me kill myself. Why is that?
John looks so incredible here with the clothes sort of accentuate, you know, the fat at his neck and make him look, you know, he looks so demonic throughout this whole section here on his knees. The poor guy had to fall to his knees about 25 times. I kept thinking, my God, he's gonna, with all that weight, he's gonna break his knees. But he was a trooper.
Yeah, I just didn't think he was gonna get up.
It was amazing, and he would actually, you know, in between takes, he wanted to make sure that he felt, you know, he would do things in order to make sure that he, you know, he felt some weight or pain or something inside his gut. And again, these are two actors who, you know, are literally up all night as we're shooting this stuff, completely exhausted. But you could never tell.
No, they're pretty. They really get their game faces on, and they just go for it.
Open your eyes.
At this juncture, we're probably, what would you say, fourth night, fifth night? At this point?
Yeah, the fifth.
Pretty deep into it.
No, this is the last night, in fact. The very last.
Was it the last night?
Yeah, this was the very last night. And, or maybe not. Maybe this was the night before the last night.
The night before the last, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was the last. Because we were still working a few things out here. But no matter, you know, you're working all night and trying your best to get some degree of sleep during the day, and there's just diminishing returns.
And because we were also trying to make sure that we got out of there before Thanksgiving, we were really doing the shortest turnarounds we could possibly do.
Bullshit.
Meaning we were working probably 14-hour days, and normally you try to give the crew at least 10 hours off and your actors 12 hours, but we were, between the travel time and everything, I think maybe at the most we were giving our crew 8 hours off, and in fact we were asking the actors if they would do what's called waive their turnaround, and instead of getting 12 hours off, also come in with much less sleep, so that we could finish the work and all get home. And they were really, really very, very accommodating.
They also want to get on that plane and go home.
Yes, I guess that's true. Now here's a different version of the kill, the bullet, which is, this one was done with the, what did we use?
That was an actual device on his forehead.
That was a device on his forehead. So it's actually a makeup person, actually, a makeup specialist actually puts the device on the forehead, and it explodes out and creates what we term is the entry wound. So two completely different methodologies for accomplishing the exact same thing.
I love the transition within Denzel here. You know, it's very distinctive. It's different from anyone else, but because he's the protagonist and the person whom we've been with since the beginning, and then the voiceover is going to come again, and you know, everyone says with good reason probably that voiceovers generally to be avoided, but the concept here of thinking you're with Hobbes throughout the movie, and it turns out the demon has been narrating the movie, seems so unusual and powerful.
So, like I said at the start.
Well, it was definitely one of the most clever reveals that I had read in an extremely long time, to find out that the character that was narrating the script was in fact the demon himself. Which, you know these things work when you read something like that, and you never could have guessed it, but yet when you analyze the script, you realize that it absolutely holds water, that reversal, and you buy it.
Hobbes figured out how to beat me at my own game. So what?
I always feel with Denzel here as the demon, that you're seeing the demon at its most elemental.
Not by a long shot.
Here we are. The spirit.
This is, I think, isn't this it? This is the last. This is the second to last shot. It's
the crane.
It's literally like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning here.
Well, the next shot is the high shot down is the one with the. Well, actually, we already saw it, I guess. Right here, we can see the reflection of the sun in the roof of the car, the sky and the roof of the car.
At the beginning, I said I was going to tell you about the time I almost died.
Boy, this cat was good.
These cats were all good.
One take cat.
They hit their marks.
I think the cat's actually the real reason that we got our work done.
Well, the cat really, they were terrific, those people who put that together.
Well, guys, I just want to say that I enjoyed watching the movie with you.
Likewise.
Yeah, it was kind of nice to see it again.